Good morning, welcome back to Footsteps of the Past. Today's episode wasn't really one that was planned. It's more one that kind of came up by chance, really. I was looking online to find some stories in and around Hampshire, some old stories. And one came up, well, a few came up to be honest, about witchcraft and people that were accused of witchcraft. Now, there wasn't that many in Hampshire, but along the South Downs way there were a few, and I also found some up in Surrey, which will also be included in this episode. So, if I give you a bit of background on this, as I say, this wasn't a planned one, but due to our intrigue and interest in the story of the Pendle witches dating back to 1612 up in Lancashire, 12 people, women and men, were charged with, found guilty and hung for witchcraft. And there is some conjecture, some debate whether they should be pardoned or not. So we're going to look at some of the stories in and around the South Downs part, and also Surrey. And then we'll look at some of the upheaval that was happening around this period of time. You look at the Hollywood perception given of witches, that would be a black cloak, a black conical hat, and with Halloween just around the corner, this isn't because of Halloween, it's just, with Halloween round the corner, like I say, it's, it brings about the perceptions of what a witch is and who a witch was. So let's start with some stories. An Agnes Melzer from Fletching accused in 1591 of bewitching Anne, the daughter of a Henry Clemens, was sentenced to imprisonment. Mother Scott of Berry was accused of witchcraft in 1603 for her work as a local herbalist. Jane Westwood of Arundel was accused in 1612 while working as a midwife and minister to the sick, but her case was thankfully dismissed. Around 75-85% of those who were accused were women, but in some cases men were accused and tried. There's a case of a Thomas Herald of Polborough in 1607, who was accused of being a witch by his neighbour Elizabeth Hitchcock, who went on to level the accusation that he did bewitch her husband's cattle and that they could not prosper for him. Most of the accused in the Sussex area appeared to have been acquitted or given sentences of imprisonment, but some of the men and women that were accused weren't so lucky. Some were sentenced to be hanged, such as a Margaret Cooper in 1575, after being accused of bewitching a man and women to death, or drowned. Pardoned for few, but one example includes Jane Mortimer from Hampshire, who in 1583 was accused of casting the spells and read out about the death of an Elizabeth Randall. You know, we look at like witches today, and it's all the Hollywood perspective of, you know, a black comical hat and things like that, when really they were just normal people, everyday folk. So let's look at some of the religious aspects of it. The laws. So Pope Innocent VIII had declared witchcraft a heresy in 1484. In England, it was the Witchcraft Act of 1541, issued by Henry VIII, which made witchcraft punishable by death. It was repealed, however, in 1547 by Henry's son, Edward VI. A new act was introduced under Elizabeth I in 1562, which also transferred the trials from the jurisdiction of the church to that of the state. She was eventually succeeded in 1603 by James I of England and the VI of Scotland, who had himself written a treatise on witchcraft in 1597 called Demonology. After becoming convinced, the stormy sea voyages in 1589 and 1590, which had delayed both his marriage to Anne of Denmark and his return to Scotland, was down to the malign influence of witches. In the late 16th and 17th centuries, the rise of the popular press and the unique set of circumstances increased unrest and uncertainty across the English society. Unlike the east of England, counties such as Sussex and Hampshire were not particularly noted for high numbers of legal cases involving accusations of witchcraft in this period. However, records for the assizes, a form of travelling court for the trial of serious offence, and the bishop's courts, do preserve the names of those accused of witchcraft who came to rural communities in what is today the South Downs National Park. Some fared better than others. As well as the real names of the real people accused, we also have many stories associated with witches, including that of an unnamed witch who lived in Ditchling Common and turned into a hare overnight or at night. This is a common theme in folklore. There's a story of a witch at Plumpton who had the power to stop carts passing her cottage no matter how hard the horses would pull. Names like Nanny Smart, Butter Ede and Old Martha paint a picture of older women, often living alone, accused of terrorising communities. So why did so many accusations arise in this period of English history? You know, we need to look at the social uncertainty, disease, plague, crop failures, religious change even. eventually the Civil War, and of course the execution of the king. It created a melting pot where people's fears and angers caused intense fractures within communities that at the time could have easily been capitalised on. Fear of witchcraft, at the time was evidently rife with archaeological discoveries giving us witch bottles often buried under or in the front of a hearth in a home or even the doorways. Though these men, they also found stoneware jugs known as Bellamines or Bartman or glass bottles, which were filled with a variety of ingredients. These would often include vinegar, bent pins, nails, hair, urine, wine, rosemary, shells, coins, earth, ash, and then buried as an active protection against the attention of witches and malevolent forces. So let's look at it in this regard now. I've given you some stories, some evidence. Now, were they, as I found out, were they just normal folk? Were they a victim of their circumstances? Somebody living, on their way, on their own. So let's now look at them as people. They were just normal people. Some of them chose to live away from the communities, on their own, separately. Some of them were just elderly women or elderly men. Now it is said that some of them may have been, herbalists, apothecaries. You look at medicine. How much medicine nowadays. And I'm not a doctor and stuff like that, but it's an interesting question. How much medicine nowadays is based on old recipes? So let's look at the history in a way. The history of the people that were accused. It's easy to say, they were evil people, but there's no evidence. There's nothing in the records to say that they were evil. The term witch, witchy, is actually a term that was used for wise, a wise woman, an old woman, and it just got sort of combined up in the sense of a witch, in terminology terms, is evil. Some of them back then, in the 16th, 17th century, were probably, learned things from their parents, and most of them probably lived off the land and created remedies, medicines at the time. And then, as I say, and then there's like their familiars, So who were these people? You look at the word for witcher in Old English, or Wicca for men. The word witch as we know it, is used to describe an evil person. But were they evil? A lot of these people were social outcasts, may have chose to live on their own, may have chose to distance themselves from their little villages and live on the outskirts, live on the edge of things. Some of these women were elderly, not all of them, but that's the perception. And these women may have had children, so they, from their experiences of life, and that's a key thing, I think, the experiences of life. They use that experience to help others. So some were what we now call midwives. Some, you can use the word apothecaries, herbalists. How many medicines nowadays are based on old recipes? I'm not a doctor and at all, but you need to look at things in this regard. You take St. John's wort, which is supposedly a herbal remedy for depression. So, you looking back at the evidence of these people, these men, these women, I can't see any other reason, as to it just being, as I said earlier, the social aspect, people just didn't like somebody, they didn't, people, like if there was a woman talking to a man, and our neighbours saw it, oh, well, she's a witch, she's done this, rumour, conjecture, and that just spreads, and then you get the people who have healed somebody, or maybe an argument, and somebody may have said something offhand, and then a child may become ill, or a woman's husband may become ill and unfortunately die. And because some woman or some man has said something to them, an offhand comment, that person's then accused of witchcraft, when it can just be the circumstances of the time, illnesses going around, hygiene wasn't exactly very paramount at the time, so let's look at it in that regard. Water can have easily been, stagnant and things like that. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest, as to why people were ill. And then we look at the religious aspect. You have, like, the Catholic Church, and some of these people that were accused of being witches and accused of witchcraft, that they didn't go to church. A lot of them were non-conformists. But, you know, the Catholic Church at the time saw a lot of these people that didn't go to church on a Sunday and would, you know, meet up in their own houses. They're like with the Pendle witches. And, you know, they were accused of being witches. You know, they were accused of the witchcraft and unfortunate things happened. And then in the political aspect, I mean, Matthew Hopkins, who was a very well-known documented witch hunter, the king gave him certain jurisdictions, but he went above what he was meant to do. He actually went against what he was asked to do. It went to his head. He had a lot to gain from it, politically. And probably so did a lot more of the witch hunters, as they called themselves. Matthew Hopkins subsequently died of a fever, I believe, from research found. And, you know, was that witchcraft? No evidence of it. You know, did somebody put a hexa on him? No evidence of it. The Godalming and parish registers showing the burial of Richard Sharman on 5th of August 1583. Agnes Stevens of Godalming was charged with his murder by witchcraft on the 12th of July 1585 at the assizes. The charges state that on the 21st of June 1583 she bewitched him so that he lingered until the 20th of July and then he died. Another one of her victims, Catherine Hammond, is also mentioned in the register. Stevens was found guilty and remanded in custody. The burial of her third victim, 6-year-old Margaret Roker, is not recorded. This was not the first time she had been tried for witchcraft. On the 26th of July 1582, she was charged with bewitching cattle belonging to Robert Osher and Thomas Allen. Although she pleaded guilty, she was pardoned. 3 other witches, Elizabeth and Joan Cox and Juliana Page, all from Godalming, were also tried at the same session but found not guilty. Articles of misdemeanour against Richard Luckins, keeper of the Sussex County Jail at Horsham. Among his crimes, he is accused of allowing prisoners to escape and attempting to recover them with the services of witches, and also siding with the King's Army when it entered Sussex. Also, during the 17th century, newspapers were sometimes published on witches, and Joan Butts is suspected of bewitching Elizabeth Burgess of Ewell after she refused to give her an old pair of gloves. She sent her away with some kind words, but Butts later returned and asked for a pin which Burgess gave her. And 14 days later, a storm blew up and a stone hit her in the back, which caused her to be confined to bed with pricking pains in her back. Butts was obvious subject for this unnatural event since he was described as a person of ill repute, and for a long time suspected to be a witch. So, yet again, It's circumstance. It's all circumstantial evidence. If things like that happened now, you wouldn't put it down to witchcraft. No. You put, no. A stone blowing up in the wind, you know, a twig blowing in the wind and hitting you. You know, I mean, really? You know, if that was the case nowadays, everyone would be paranoid. Everyone would be charged with something to do with being a witch or witchcraft. So that brings this video to a close. Thank you for watching. There may be a part 2. It really depends on what reaction we get. I also want to try and get the views of other people. Mainly, you know, interview, if I can, some, you know, local witches, pagans, you know, or whatever people may want to call them. You know, we have an open mind here at Footsteps. You know, we have our own views on what's happened in the past regarding particularly independent witches. We feel that they were wrongly done too, wrongly accused, and wrongly put to death. But we also respect that other people may not share that view and that opinion. That's up to them. We're not here to change people's minds. You know, we just find stories, research them, and do the videos on them. Not because we are under any pressure to do it. We're not. We do them, that's it, because we want to do them, and we firmly believe that there are stories that need to be told, that should be told. You know, stories that are long forgotten and within, like, families. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing if you have. If you haven't yet, please do so. We are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, TikTok, etc. Until the next video, take care. Remember, no one knows what lies in their history. Thank you. Bye for now.